6 a.m. Sunday morning. Coffee in hand, I watched from my kitchen window as HOA President Priscilla Vanderberg's bulldozer smashed my great-grandfather's 90-year-old stone bridge, the one he built by hand during the Great Depression. Each 200-pound limestone block he carved himself crashed into Pine Lake like broken family history. No warning, no court order, nothing legal, just her greed for my waterfront land to expand her luxury resort. I ran out in pajamas, yelling. She rolled down her Tesla window, smirked, and said,
"Next time, think twice before defying the HOA, Mr. Blackwood."
Diesel smoke stung my eyes. My hands shook. The mug slipped and shattered. She'd stolen 3 generations of irreplaceable Blackwood memories. But bullies always pick the wrong fight. 48 hours later, her $4.2 million Lakeside empire collapsed. The lake drained dry. Resort abandoned. Millions vanished overnight. What would you do if your HOA destroyed your family's legacy? Share your worst HOA horror story in the comments. My name's Thad Blackwood, and I've been fighting bullies my whole life. Army taught me how. Losing my wife Sarah to cancer 2 years ago taught me what's actually worth fighting for. But nothing prepared me for the human hurricane named Priscilla Vanderberg. Picture Pine Lake on a perfect September morning. Mist curling off the water like cigarette smoke, loons calling their haunting song, the smell of pine sap warming in the sunrise. My great-grandfather Ezekiel picked this spot in 1934 because it reminded him of the Scottish Highlands. Bought 15 acres of pristine lakefront for what a decent pickup truck costs today. That stone bridge connecting our mainland to the family island, Ezekiel built it by hand during the Depression. Each limestone block weighs over 200 pounds. I know because I helped my dad repair it when I was 12, nearly threw out my back trying to lift one. Ezekiel quarried, cut, and fitted every stone like a 3-dimensional puzzle that survived 90 years of ice storms, floods, and teenage stupidity. Fast forward to today. I'm raising my 16-year-old daughter Melody alone, making ends meet with custom carpentry and veteran disability payments. Not rich, but the land is ours free and clear. In a world where everything gets bought, sold, and demolished for profit, ours still means something. Then Priscilla Vanderberg slithered into our lives. 18 months ago, this California real estate vulture bought the old Henderson mansion, paying cash, naturally, and immediately got herself elected president of the Willowbrook Heights HOA. Picture a 48-year-old woman who looks like she was manufactured in the same factory that makes Stepford Wives. White Tesla Model X, white designer blazers, teeth so perfect they could cut glass, and the warmth of a rattlesnake in January. Her masterpiece? The Pine Lake Resort and Spa. $4.2 million of fake rustic luxury designed to separate rich city folks from their money. Think glamping, but with room service and Wi-Fi that actually works. Here's the beautiful irony. Vanderberg's resort opens Tuesday morning, exactly 72 hours from when she demolished my bridge. 200 VIP guests confirmed. Media coverage arranged. 1.2 million in deposits collected from people who think roughing it means staying somewhere without a concierge. But Priscilla's got a geography problem. Her resort needs lakefront access across multiple properties to really work. Boat tours, waterfront dining, scenic overlooks, the whole fantasy requires controlling the shoreline. Guess whose 15 acres sit right in the middle of her empire? She started with honey. $400,000 for my waterfront paradise. Sweet offer, except comparable properties sell for twice that. When I politely declined, okay, maybe I laughed in her face, the honey turned to vinegar. Suddenly, my perfectly maintained property was apparently a neighborhood menace. Grass too long by half an inch. Dock structurally unsafe despite passing county inspection last spring. Workshop too noisy during normal business hours. My personal favorite, a $50 fine for my non-conforming black mailbox. Karen, every mailbox in the county is black. 6 months of escalating harassment. Daily violation notices that would make the Gestapo proud. Surprise inspections where she'd show up with a measuring tape and a clipboard, hunting for violations like she was on a treasure hunt. Anonymous calls to county health claiming I had septic problems. Spoiler alert, my system was newer than hers. The psychological warfare extended to Melody. HOA board members' kids suddenly asking her why her dad was such a troublemaker and wouldn't just cooperate like everyone else. Nothing makes my blood boil faster than bullies targeting my kid. 15,000 in accumulated fines I refuse to pay. Because here's what I learned in Afghanistan. Give ground to bullies, and they'll keep taking until there's nothing left. Friday's ultimatum was the final straw. Vanderburg declared my bridge an unpermitted structure blocking emergency boat access. 30 days to remove it or face enforcement action. I made the mistake of consulting a lawyer. Vanderburg found out and panicked that legal delays might kill her Tuesday grand opening. So Saturday night, she went nuclear. Sunday morning, while I was watching Melody score the winning goal at her soccer tournament, Vanderburg was paying cash to demolish 90 years of family history. She thought she'd won. Actually, she'd just handed me a loaded gun. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m., right as Melody was lining up for her penalty kick. Mrs. Juliet's voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand her. "Thad, you need to get home now. They're destroying your bridge with a bulldozer." I've heard explosions in combat zones, artillery shells, IEDs, but nothing prepared me for the sound of my great-grandfather's limestone masterpiece being reduced to rubble. The diesel engine's roar carried across the water like a mechanical scream, punctuated by the crash of 200-pound stones hitting Pine Lake with the finality of a funeral bell. 20-minute drive from the soccer field felt like 20 hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought it might crack. When I pulled into my driveway, Vanderburg was standing beside her pristine white Tesla, sipping what looked like a Starbucks venti something, watching my family's legacy disappear into the lake. She had her phone out, taking pictures like a tourist documenting the demolition of the Berlin Wall. The woman was actually enjoying this. The demolition crew looked embarrassed. The operator kept glancing at me, then back at Vanderburg, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Even bulldozer drivers have consciences, apparently. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust mixed with limestone dust created a fog that burned my nostrils and coated my tongue with the taste of destruction. I stormed over in my soccer dad uniform, cargo shorts and a Melody's team t-shirt. Real intimidating. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Vanderburg didn't even look up from her phone, just kept filming. "Emergency safety removal, Mr. Blackwood, should have taken my offer when you had the chance." "You have no legal authority to—" "Actually, I do." She handed me a folded paper with the smugness of someone who thinks they've just played the ace of spades. "Emergency demolition permit. Demolition. Your precious bridge was deemed structurally unsafe by qualified inspectors." I wanted to grab that permit and stuff it down her throat, but years of dealing with military bureaucracy had taught me something useful. When someone waves paperwork in your face that confidently, they're usually covering up a mistake. I called the sheriff's department anyway. Deputy Martinez showed up 40 minutes later, took one look at Vanderburg's paperwork, and delivered the line every victim of bureaucratic bullying knows by heart. "Looks legal to me, sir. This is a civil matter. You'll need to call your lawyer." By noon, my bridge was gone. 90 years of hand-cut craftsmanship reduced to a pile of broken limestone at the bottom of Pine Lake. Vanderburg's parting words as she climbed into her Tesla made my blood pressure spike. "Next time, think twice before defying the board, Mr. Blackwood." But sometimes guardian angels come disguised as retired county clerks, Mrs. Juliet appeared at my kitchen door around 2 p.m., carrying a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse, and wearing the expression of someone who'd just discovered the crown jewels in a garage sale. She's 78, spent 35 years processing government paperwork, and has the kind of institutional memory that bureaucrats have nightmares about. "That woman made a very expensive mistake," she said, spreading documents across my kitchen table like a detective laying out evidence. "I pulled these Friday afternoon because something about her permits smelled fishier than the lake in August." The first document she showed me was Vanderburg's emergency demolition permit. My eyes went straight to the description. "Structurally unsafe commercial dock poses immediate threat to public safety." I blinked, read it again. "Commercial dock?" Mrs. Juliet's smile could have powered the county for a week. "Your bridge is private residential property built in 1934 with a perfect structural inspection from 18 months ago." She lied on a federal document to get that demolition permit. Years ago, when I was learning carpentry from my father, he told me something that stuck. "Son, when someone lies about the small details, they're usually hiding something much bigger." At the time, he was talking about contractors who pad their estimates. Turned out the principle applied to permit frauding HOA tyrants too. Mrs. Juliet wasn't done. The jasmine tea she'd brought smelled like victory as she pulled out the second document, Vanderburg's Resort Environmental Permit Application. Look at this map from her 2024 environmental study. I studied the property survey. No bridge marked anywhere. Clean shoreline, no existing structures, environmentally pristine. Then she showed me Vanderburg's original 2023 development plans. Same area, but this map clearly showed my bridge in perfect detail, right down to the architectural specifications. She erased your bridge from the environmental study, Mrs. Juliet said quietly. When you apply for environmental permits, you have to list every existing structure within 500 feet. Miss one accidentally, they make you redo the study. Lie about one deliberately. Federal fraud, I finished. My dad had dealt with enough government inspectors to teach me that the feds don't mess around with environmental paperwork. Mrs. Juliet nodded. Her resort's final inspection is Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. If anything's wrong with those permits. The 48-hour countdown had officially started, and Vanderburg had just handed me the ammunition to blow up her empire. Sunday evening should have been peaceful. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table drowning in more government paperwork than a Pentagon audit, while Melody helped me cross-reference Vanderburg's permit applications. The kid inherited her mother's laser focus. Sarah could spot a restaurant bill error from across the table, and apparently that superpower didn't skip a generation. Dad, these dates are all screwed up, Melody said, holding two documents side by side. Look. Vanderburg's environmental permit showed a submission date of March 15, 2024. But the property survey attached to it was dated April 3rd, 3 weeks later. Someone had backdated paperwork, probably hoping county clerks wouldn't notice. Rookie mistake. Government employees live for catching that stuff. Around 9 p.m., my phone exploded with a text from Mrs. Juliet. Turn on Channel 7 News now! The headline made me nearly choke on my coffee. Local HOA president accused of pressuring county inspector. Holy shit. Vanderburg had spent Sunday evening trying to bribe Inspector Williams into completing Monday's resort inspection early. When he refused, she'd offered his wife a lucrative catering contract for the resort restaurant. Williams was professional enough to decline and smart enough to record the conversation. The news quoted him directly. Appropriate inspections require daylight hours and proper scheduling. Attempts to circumvent standard procedures raise serious red flags about what someone might be trying to hide. She was trying to rush the inspection before anyone could file complaints, but I was already 3 steps ahead, thanks to Mrs. Juliet's document treasure hunt. Melody looked up from her laptop, grinning. Dad, she's totally panicking. Look at this. She'd found Vanderburg's social media because rich, middle-aged women apparently can't resist oversharing. Recent posts showed her stress eating at the country club, complaining about difficult neighbors and jealous people trying to destroy success. I called Rebecca Santos, my lawyer who'd handled Sarah's estate. Pure luck that Rebecca specialized in environmental law. I'd originally hired her for boring property stuff, but now her expertise was about to save my ass. Thad, this is federal felony territory, she said after reviewing the permits I'd emailed. When developers deliberately omit existing structures from environmental studies, prosecutors call it green fraud. The FBI Environmental Crimes Unit loves these cases because they're easy to prove and generate great headlines. Rebecca explained something that made my carpenter's brain happy. Environmental permits work like building codes. Miss something by accident, you get a do-over. Hide something deliberately to avoid complications, and federal prosecutors start measuring you for orange jumpsuits. Monday morning, 6 a.m. I was already dressed, caffeinated, and ready for war. But first, I wanted one more look at Vanderburg's precious resort. The early morning mist rising off Pine Lake should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like reconnaissance. I parked across from the resort and started counting windows like I was calling in an airstrike. Something was wrong with the math. Vanderburg's approved plans showed 47 guest rooms, but I was looking at 52 sets of windows. The woman had expanded during construction without updating her permits, a move that would make any contractor break into cold sweats. But the real bombshell was sitting right in front of me, the septic system. Years of lakefront living had taught me that waterfront septic systems are like ticking time bombs if they're undersized. I knew from my own property that permits are based on precise capacity calculations. 47 rooms meant capacity for 94 guests maximum. But if Vanderburg had built 52 rooms, She was exceeding her wastewater treatment capacity by 15% every day, potentially dumping untreated sewage into Pine Lake. The smell of fresh coffee from my thermos mixed with the crisp morning air as I called Mrs. Juliet with my discovery. Her response was pure poetry. Environmental violation triggers automatic stop work order, no exceptions, no appeals during investigation. At exactly 8 a.m., I walked into the county environmental office carrying my complaint form, photos of the oversized resort, and copies of Vanderberg's contradictory permits. The clerk was a young guy named Patterson who looked like he'd rather be surfing than processing paperwork. Until he saw my documents. "Holy crap," Patterson whispered, studying the photos. "This triggers immediate investigation. Construction halt goes into effect the second I enter this into the system." I checked my watch. 8:15 a.m. Vanderberg's inspection was supposed to start at 7 a.m., but knowing her control freak personality, she was probably breathing down Inspector Williams' neck, demanding he hurry up and sign off. Patterson's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Notification sent. Any work that continues after this timestamp is a federal violation with $50,000 daily penalties." My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Stop work order confirmed. Vanderberg's resort is officially toxic waste." The taste of justice was starting to wash away the bitter aftertaste of yesterday's destruction. Game, set, match. Monday, 6:30 a.m. I parked across from Vanderberg's resort with a thermos of coffee and a front row seat to what I hoped would be the greatest meltdown in HOA history. She'd arrived in her white Tesla like some kind of corporate cavalry, followed by Inspector Williams in his dented county truck. Even from 100 yards away, I could see her gesturing frantically, probably explaining why this inspection was more crucial than the moon landing. The smell of fresh pine mixed with morning dew reminded me of countless peaceful mornings with Sarah. She would have loved watching this rich woman's empire crumble. My wife had zero tolerance for bullies, especially ones who picked on veterans and their kids. At exactly 7 a.m., Vanderberg led Inspector Williams around her resort like a helicopter mom chaperoning prom. She kept checking her Rolex, clearly pushing for the fastest inspection in county history. Poor Williams looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, maybe getting a root canal or auditing the IRS. My phone was loaded with Rebecca Santos on speed dial, ready to confirm our environmental complaint had been processed. 7:45 a.m. brought the call I'd been waiting for. "Thad, it's Rebecca. The environmental complaint is officially in the system. Stop work order goes live the moment it hits Williams' computer." I could see Williams inside the resort's main lobby, clipboard in hand, methodically checking electrical panels and fire exits. Vanderberg was practically vibrating with nervous energy, following him room to room like an anxious golden retriever. 8:15 a.m. Williams' phone buzzed. From my parking spot, I watched him answer, listen for about 30 seconds, then look at Vanderberg with the expression of a doctor about to deliver terminal diagnosis news. His face went from professional neutral to "oh shit" in about 2 seconds flat. That's when Vanderberg completely lost her composure. She started arguing with Williams, waving her hands like she was conducting an invisible orchestra, pointing at her watch, probably explaining how many important people would be personally offended if this inspection didn't continue. Williams wasn't buying it. He shook his head, packed up his clipboard with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with entitled property owners before, and headed for the exit. Vanderberg followed him outside, and that's when I got my money's worth. She actually grabbed Williams' arm, physically grabbed a county official who was trying to leave her property. Williams jerked away like she'd tasered him and said something that made Vanderberg step back with her mouth hanging open like a fish. Williams drove away in his county truck, leaving Vanderberg standing in her resort parking lot looking like someone had just explained that her lottery ticket was fake. My phone rang again. Rebecca, barely containing her glee. "The stop work order triggered automatic health department notification. They're sending someone to verify the septic capacity violation this afternoon." But Vanderberg wasn't done making catastrophic decisions. Around 10 a.m., I watched 3 pickup trucks pull into the resort parking lot. Vanderberg had called her construction crew back to work, apparently believing she could ignore federal environmental law through sheer force of will. Workers started moving equipment, installing light fixtures, and generally pretending that federal stop work orders were merely suggestions. I've seen some ballsy moves in my time, but watching a middle-aged real estate developer thumb her nose at federal enforcement was like watching someone punch a grizzly bear and expect it to apologize. I called Rebecca immediately. "She's got active construction happening right now. That's $50,000 per day in violations, Rebecca said, her voice practically purring with satisfaction. I'm calling the state environmental office. They can have enforcement there within the hour. While I waited for the cavalry to arrive, I documented everything with my phone camera. Vanderberg directing workers, pointing at her watch, probably promising bonuses if they could somehow finish an inspection that had already been canceled by federal order. Around 11 a.m., 2 state environmental officers arrived in an official truck marked Environmental Crimes Unit. These weren't county paper pushers. These were the environmental equivalent of federal marshals, wearing cargo pants and serious expressions that suggested they'd seen this rodeo before. Vanderberg met them in her white blazer, still trying to project authority. I couldn't hear the conversation, but her body language shifted from confident to defensive to borderline panicked in about 3 minutes. The officers weren't impressed by her resort, her outfit, or her explanations. One walked through the property with a camera, documenting active construction in violation of federal orders. The other took statements from workers who looked like they were realizing they'd been caught holding the bag for someone else's crime. By noon, yellow, environmental violation, no entry tape surrounded the entire property like crime scene ribbon. Vanderberg stood in her empty parking lot, staring at her dead resort with the expression of someone watching their life's work burn down. The taste of justice was better than Mrs. Juliet's jasmine tea. Monday afternoon, Melody burst through our front door with her laptop clutched against her chest like buried treasure. Dad, I've been researching Little Miss Tesla during study hall instead of doing calculus homework. You're going to love this. She kicked off her sneakers, a habit that would have driven Sarah crazy, and spread her laptop across our kitchen table, right next to the cold pizza that had become our main food group since Sunday's demolition disaster. I found Vanderberg's business filings, she announced, cracking her knuckles like a hacker in a movie. Turns out our neighborhood dictator is broker than a college student eating ramen for the 3rd week straight. The documents on Melody's screen showed Vanderberg's development company drowning in debt. Over $8 million spread across 3 different projects with monthly payments that would make most people hyperventilate. But buried in the fine print of her Pine Lake Resort financing was the real gold mine. She took out what finance people call a bridge loan, Melody explained, sounding more like a Wall Street analyst than someone who still needed permission slips for field trips. Think of it as financial Russian roulette, super high interest rates, short payback period, designed to cover construction until the money starts rolling in. I squinted at the paperwork, remembering my dad's golden rule about contracts. If you don't understand it, someone's probably trying to screw you. What happens when she can't pay it back? Melody's grin could have powered our house for a week. That's where it gets beautiful. The loan requires her resort to open and start collecting guest payments by Wednesday, September 16th. Miss that deadline, and the entire balance, $4.2 million, becomes due immediately. My coffee mug stopped midway to my mouth. The bitter taste of morning coffee mixed with the sweet realization that Vanderberg had bet everything on an opening date that was now impossible to meet. But wait, there's more, Melody continued, channeling her inner infomercial host. She personally guaranteed this loan using her California mansion as collateral. If this project fails, she doesn't just lose the resort, she loses everything. House, business, probably that pretentious Tesla too. The smell of reheated pizza couldn't compete with the aroma of impending justice. Vanderberg hadn't just been pushing for a quick inspection because she was impatient. She was staring at complete financial ruin if her resort didn't open on Tuesday. Rebecca called around 4 p.m., her voice practically vibrating with excitement. Thad, the insurance investigator reviewing your bridge claim, just discovered something interesting. When Vanderberg applied for that demolition permit, she claimed she had property owner authorization. But you never gave authorization, did you? Hell no. That converts your bridge destruction from a civil dispute to insurance fraud. Criminal charges, not just a lawsuit. Insurance companies are like bloodhounds when they smell fraud. They don't just deny claims, they hunt down every detail until someone goes to prison. Sarah had dealt with enough medical insurance battles to teach me that insurers take fraud personally. Melody looked up from her laptop where she'd been diving deeper into Vanderberg's financial records. Dad, I found something else that's going to make you happy. She's already collected $1.2 million in resort deposits from guests expecting to check in tomorrow. The implications hit me like a 2x4 to the head. Vanderberg wasn't just facing bankruptcy. She was holding over $1 million in deposits for a resort that couldn't legally open. Money she'd probably already spent on construction costs and loan payments. Mrs. Juliet appeared at our kitchen door around 6 p.m., carrying her evening jasmine tea and wearing the satisfied expression of someone with premium gossip to share. Vanderburg tried to file an emergency appeal this afternoon, she announced, settling into our kitchen chair. County rejected it faster than a bad loan application. Environmental violations can't be appealed until federal investigation concludes. How long? I asked. Minimum 90 days. Could be 2 years if they find serious contamination. Tomorrow morning, 200 disappointed VIPs would be demanding refunds. Wednesday, her loan payment would come due with zero revenue to cover it. Vanderburg had demolished my family's bridge thinking she'd removed the last obstacle to success. Instead, she'd just lit the fuse on her own financial destruction. Tuesday morning, 5 a.m. While Vanderburg was probably lying awake calculating how to refund $1.2 million to angry VIP guests, I was in my workshop plotting her complete destruction with the most unlikely war council in HOA history. My workshop at dawn is my favorite place on earth. The smell of pine shavings mixed with motor oil, the taste of coffee so strong it could strip paint, and the satisfying weight of tools that actually solve problems instead of creating them. Sarah used to say I could fix anything in this room except my own stubborn streak. Rebecca Santos arrived first, carrying enough legal documents to paper a small house. Mrs. Juliet followed with her jasmine tea and the smug expression of someone who'd spent 40 years watching bureaucrats hang themselves with their own red tape. Dr. Ruby Washington brought up the rear with a historical analysis thick enough to stop a bullet. Ladies, we're not just fighting one corrupt HOA president, I announced, pouring coffee into mugs that had seen better decades. We're dismantling a criminal enterprise. Rebecca spread her battle plans across my workbench between a half-finished jewelry box and my father's vintage handplane. Vanderburg didn't just violate one law, she created a perfect storm of federal crimes: environmental fraud, insurance fraud, destruction of historic property, and civil rights violations. Mrs. Juliet nodded sagely. In my experience, bureaucrats love patterns. One violation might be an accident. 4 violations across multiple federal agencies? That's a career-ending conspiracy. The morning sun streaming through my workshop windows felt like a spotlight illuminating Vanderburg's legal grave. Dr. Washington pulled out photographs of my demolished bridge that looked like evidence from a war crimes trial. Your great-grandfather's bridge wasn't just family property, she explained, her teacher voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years making teenagers pay attention to history. It's one of only 3 surviving examples of Depression-era Scottish immigrant stonework in our county. The other 2 are already protected as federal historic landmarks. Rebecca's eyes lit up like she'd just discovered oil in her backyard. That gives us federal standing to demand criminal prosecution under the National Historic Preservation Act. Destroying irreplaceable cultural heritage isn't just vandalism. It's a federal hate crime against immigrant contributions to American heritage. I remembered something my father had told me about government work. Bureaucrats might move slowly, but they never forget, and they love making examples out of people who think they're smarter than the system. Mrs. Juliet was taking notes like she was planning the Normandy invasion. We should also file civil rights complaints about the HOA's harassment pattern. Targeting veterans and their families creates federal jurisdiction under discrimination laws. My phone buzzed with a text from Melody. Channel 7, Channel 12, and some lady from PBS all want interviews. Told them you'd call back. Also, someone started a GoFundMe for bridge reconstruction, and it's already at $50K. You're famous, Dad. The taste of victory was starting to override the lingering bitterness of Sunday's destruction. Dr. Washington produced her secret weapon, a petition signed by over 400 community members demanding Vanderburg's prosecution and supporting federal historic preservation charges. I presented this to the county commissioners yesterday evening. Unanimous vote to support all federal charges and request state investigation of HOA corruption. Rebecca explained something that made my carpenter's brain appreciate the elegance of good legal strategy. When developers violate environmental permits, they don't just pay fines. They're required to restore the property to its original condition at their own expense. For Vanderburg's resort, that means complete demolition and wetland restoration, she said. Conservative estimate, $2 million in cleanup costs, plus federal penalties, plus victim restitution. Mrs. Juliet whistled low. Combined with her loan payment due tomorrow and guest refunds, she's looking at financial catastrophe that would make the Hindenburg look like a successful flight. But the most beautiful part was the timing. Environmental violations would kill the resort immediately. Insurance fraud charges would destroy her development company within 30 days. Historic preservation prosecution would put her in federal prison for up to 5 years. The civil rights complaints would ensure she could never serve on another HOA board anywhere in America. By the time we're finished, Rebecca said, packing up her legal ammunition with the satisfaction of someone who'd just planned the perfect checkmate, Vanderburg will be lucky if she can get hired to manage a gas station bathroom. Around 8 a.m., we walked outside to survey the scene of Vanderburg's empire. Her resort sat wrapped in yellow environmental crime scene tape like a massive Christmas present nobody wanted. County vehicles were parked in the lot, investigators documenting violations that would keep lawyers busy for years. Dr. Washington pointed toward the lake where my bridge used to stand. Your great-grandfather built that bridge to connect your family to something permanent in an uncertain world. Vanderburg destroyed it thinking she could erase your history. I watched the morning mist clear over Pine Lake, revealing the stumps of limestone supports still visible beneath the water. Instead, she just guaranteed her own destruction will be remembered forever. The smell of pine sap warming in the sunrise mixed with the sweet aroma of justice finally being served. Tuesday, 6 a.m. I was sipping coffee on my dock, watching the sunrise paint Pine Lake the color of liquid gold, when Vanderburg's white Tesla came screaming into her resort parking lot like she was fleeing a zombie apocalypse. The woman who demolished my bridge with the confidence of a medieval queen now looked like she'd spent the night wrestling with reality and lost. Even from across the water, I could see her standing in the middle of her yellow-taped crime scene, probably calculating how fast $4.2 million in debt could destroy a person's life. The morning air was so still I could hear her phone ringing from my dock. Then her voice, not the words but the tone, high-pitched, desperate, the vocal equivalent of someone trying to convince people that the Titanic was just taking a little dive to cool off. Around 7 a.m., the federal cavalry arrived. 3 black SUVs rolled into the resort parking lot with the kind of government authority that makes normal people nervous and guilty people panic. Environmental crime unit officers emerged wearing cargo pants, serious expressions, and equipment that suggested they weren't here to discuss the weather. Vanderburg met them in her signature white blazer, but her body language had shifted from corporate shark to cornered rat. I watched her pointing at buildings, checking her Rolex, making increasingly frantic hand gestures like she was conducting an invisible orchestra playing disaster symphonies. The officers took photos, made notes, and occasionally shook their heads with the patience of people who'd seen this exact performance from 1,000 other desperate developers. Then Vanderburg made the kind of decision that separates ordinary criminals from candidates for the Darwin Awards. She pulled out her checkbook. From my front row seat on the dock, I watched her attempt to write what appeared to be a check to a federal environmental investigator. The officer stepped back like she'd offered him a live grenade, said something sharp enough to make Vanderburg stumble backward, then immediately pulled out his radio. My workshop phone rang 30 seconds later. "Thad, please tell me you're watching Vanderburg's property right now." Rebecca's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. Front row seats to what looks like the world's dumbest bribery attempt. Attempted bribery of federal officers. State Police Dispatch just confirmed they're en route. Vanderburg just upgraded from environmental criminal to federal felon. The taste of morning coffee mixed with the absolutely delicious flavor of watching someone throw gasoline on their own dumpster fire. Vanderburg hadn't just violated environmental law. She'd just committed federal bribery in front of witnesses with cameras. But Vanderburg wasn't finished making spectacularly bad decisions. Around 8 a.m., she apparently decided that if bribery wouldn't work, maybe intimidation would. I watched through Melody's binoculars as she started shouting at the environmental officers, waving her arms like she was trying to scare away a flock of geese. Bad move. Federal investigators don't intimidate easily, and they really don't appreciate being yelled at by people who just tried to bribe them. One officer made another radio call. Within minutes, 2 state police cruisers arrived, followed by what appeared to be every news crew within a 100-mile radius. Vanderburg's meltdown was about to become the morning's entertainment for half the state. The irony was absolutely perfect. Sunday morning, she'd demolished my bridge at dawn, thinking nobody would witness her crime. Tuesday morning, her breakdown was being broadcast live on 3 different news channels while she stood trapped in her own parking lot. My phone started buzzing with interview requests. Channel 7, Channel 12, some lady from PBS, even a producer from a national morning show who'd seen the story trending on social media. Melody texted from school, "OMG, Dad, a Justice for Thad is viral, 2 million views. Also, Bridge GoFundMe just hit 200K and some rich guy from California donated 50K because he hates HOAs too." Around 10 a.m., Vanderburg tried one final desperate move. She attempted to get into her resort building, probably hoping to hide until the media circus moved on to someone else's disaster. The federal officers weren't having it. I watched them escort her away from her own building, like she was trying to break into someone else's property. The entire resort was now a federal crime scene, and she was officially banned from her own empire. By noon, the entertainment reached peak levels when Vanderburg's construction loan officers arrived in a black town car that screamed foreclosure proceedings. The 48-hour window had officially closed. Her resort couldn't open. Her loan was in default. I watched from my dock as bank officials posted bright orange foreclosure notices on every building like they were decorating for Halloween. Vanderburg's $4 million dream was being officially repossessed by people who specialized in liquidating other people's failures. The smell of pine sap warming in the afternoon sun mixed with the sweet aroma of justice being served with a side of poetic irony. Vanderburg had thought she could bulldoze my family's legacy and walk away whistling. Instead, she'd created a masterclass in how to destroy your entire life in less time than it takes most people to plan a vacation. Wednesday morning brought news that would have made my great-grandfather proud. I was reading the local paper's front-page story, HOA president arrested for federal bribery, when my phone rang with the most satisfying update yet. "Thad, it's Rebecca. Vanderburg just posted bail and immediately made another catastrophic mistake." I could practically hear the grin in my lawyer's voice. "What did she do now?" "She called the environmental investigator at home this morning and offered him $100,000 to reconsider his findings." The man recorded the entire conversation. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others apparently use their mistakes as inspiration for bigger, more spectacular failures. Vanderburg had just graduated from attempted bribery to full-scale corruption conspiracy. The morning coffee tasted like victory as Rebecca explained that Vanderburg's second bribery attempt had triggered a federal racketeering investigation. The FBI was now looking into whether her HOA corruption was part of a larger pattern across multiple states. Around 10 a.m., I got a front-row seat to the final act of Vanderburg's empire. County health inspectors arrived at the resort with equipment that looked like something from a hazmat team. They weren't just checking septic violations anymore, they were testing for groundwater contamination that could affect the entire lake ecosystem. The resort's oversized septic system hadn't just violated permit requirements. It had been leaking untreated wastewater into Pine Lake for months, creating an environmental disaster that would take years to remediate. Dr. Frank Torres, the marine biologist who'd supported my bridge fight, arrived with water testing equipment and the grim expression of someone about to document an ecological crime scene. "Thad, preliminary tests show bacterial contamination levels 20 times higher than safe swimming standards. The smell of Pine Lake should have been fresh water and pine trees. Instead, there was an underlying stench that reminded me of overflowing sewage, the aromatic signature of Vanderburg's environmental crimes." By noon, the health department had posted signs around the entire lake. Water contamination, no swimming, no fishing, no water contact. Vanderburg hadn't just destroyed her resort, she'd poisoned the lake that gave our community its identity. But the afternoon brought the most devastating blow yet. Around 2 p.m., federal marshals arrived with seizure warrants for all of Vanderburg's assets. Not just the resort, everything. Her California mansion, her Tesla, her bank accounts, even her country club membership. The federal government was claiming everything she owned as proceeds from environmental crimes. I watched from my dock as marshals tagged every piece of equipment, every vehicle, every stick of furniture in the resort. Vanderburg stood in the parking lot wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like someone who just realized that karma comes with compound interest. The local news crews captured every moment as marshals loaded Vanderburg's personal belongings into evidence boxes. Her white Tesla got towed away on a flatbed truck, probably heading for a federal auction where someone would buy it for pennies on the dollar. Melody arrived home from school with updates that made my day even brighter. Dad, the bridge reconstruction GoFundMe just hit $400,000. People from all over the country are donating because they hate corrupt HOAs. Also, some documentary filmmaker wants to make a movie about your story. But the best news came around 4 p.m. when Mrs. Juliet knocked on my door carrying a manila folder and the biggest smile I'd seen since this whole nightmare started. The county just approved emergency funding for environmental cleanup, she announced. $2 million from federal disaster relief funds to restore Pine Lake to its original condition. She opened the folder to reveal architectural plans for a new Pine Lake Community Center, built on the exact spot where Vanderburg's resort used to sit. They're also approving a historic preservation grant to rebuild your great-grandfather's bridge using traditional techniques and modern safety standards. The evening brought one final twist that felt like justice wrapped in perfect irony. Vanderburg's HOA nemesis, the organization she'd used to terrorize neighbors for 18 months, voted unanimously to dissolve itself. The remaining board members had discovered that Vanderburg had been embezzling HOA fees to fund her resort project, another federal crime to add to her growing collection. As sunset painted Pine Lake gold and orange, I sat on my dock with Melody, watching federal investigators pack up their equipment. The yellow crime scene tape was coming down, replaced by signs announcing the lake's restoration and the community center construction.
Dad, Melody said quietly, do you think great-great-grandfather Ezekiel would be proud?
I looked toward where our family bridge used to stand, where it would stand again within 6 months, rebuilt with donated funds and community labor. Sweetheart, I think he'd say that sometimes you have to tear down the wrong things to build the right ones. The loons were calling across the contaminated water that would soon be clean again. Vanderburg had thought she could poison our lake and destroy our history. Instead, she'd just inspired an entire community to build something better than what came before. Friday morning, the Pine Lake County Courthouse looked like the site of a presidential visit. News crews from 3 states had arrived for Vanderburg's federal arraignment, along with what appeared to be half our county's population carrying signs reading, "Justice for Thad" and "Lock her up." I arrived with Melody, Mrs. Juliet, Dr. Washington, and Rebecca Santos, my unlikely army of allies who'd helped expose Vanderburg's criminal empire. The courthouse steps were packed with supporters I'd never expected. Veterans from the local VFW post, environmental activists, even some of Vanderburg's former HOA victims who'd driven from neighboring counties to watch her downfall. The smell of autumn leaves mixed with the anticipation of a crowd that had waited months to see justice served. Camera crews positioned themselves for perfect shots of Vanderburg's perp walk, while federal marshals cleared a path through protesters who'd been peacefully gathering since dawn. At exactly 9 a.m., Vanderburg emerged from a federal transport van wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed magnificently with her bleached blonde hair. Gone was the white Tesla, the designer blazer, the arrogant smirk that had terrorized our neighborhood. She looked like exactly what she was, a common criminal facing serious federal time. The courthouse gallery was standing room only. I sat in the front row with my supporters directly behind the prosecutor's table, where I had perfect view of Vanderburg's reaction to each new charge being read. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison took the bench with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of criminal excuse and wasn't impressed by any of them. She looked at Vanderburg like she was examining a particularly unpleasant insect. "Ms. Vanderburg," Judge Morrison began, "you stand accused of environmental fraud, attempted bribery of federal officers, insurance fraud, destruction of historic property, embezzlement of HOA funds, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. How do you plead?" Vanderburg's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who'd probably drawn the short straw at his firm, whispered frantically in her ear. Vanderburg stood slowly, her orange jumpsuit rustling in the silent courtroom. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The gallery erupted in disgusted murmurs until Judge Morrison's gavel restored order. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for since Sunday morning. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named District Attorney Sarah Juliet, no relation to Mrs. Juliet, stood to present evidence. "Your Honor, the defendant's crimes began with the illegal demolition of a 90-year-old historic bridge belonging to veteran Thaddeus Blackwood. DA Juliet activated a courtroom screen showing photos of my demolished bridge, then played audio recordings of Vanderburg's bribery attempts. The sound quality was crystal clear, Vanderburg's voice offering increasingly desperate bribes to federal investigators. But the defendant's most revealing statement, DA Juliet continued, came during her arrest yesterday. She played a recording I hadn't heard before. Vanderberg's voice captured by federal wire recordings during her final arrest. I don't care about some stupid veterans bridge. I don't care about environmental laws. I built that resort to make money, and I'll destroy anyone who gets in my way. The courthouse went dead silent. Even Vanderberg's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Vanderberg, did you just hear your own voice making those statements? Vanderberg's composure finally cracked completely. That recording is illegal. You can't use that. I have rights. This whole case is a conspiracy by jealous neighbors who can't handle successful women. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but Vanderberg was beyond reason. That bridge was falling apart anyway. I did everyone a favor, and if that veteran wasn't so stubborn, none of this would have happened. Judge Morrison's gavel came down like thunder. Ms. Vanderberg, you've just confessed to the charges in open court. Your statements will be entered into evidence. The mic drop moment came when DA Juliet stood for her closing statement. Your Honor, Priscilla Vanderberg thought she could bulldoze a veteran's family history because she assumed no one would fight back. She was wrong. She thought she could bribe federal officers because she assumed her money made her untouchable. She was wrong. She thought she could poison Pine Lake and destroy our community because she assumed we'd be too intimidated to stop her. She was spectacularly wrong. The gallery erupted in applause until Judge Morrison restored order with her gavel. Bail denied. Ms. Vanderberg will remain in federal custody pending trial. Given the severity of environmental crimes and flight risk assessment, sentencing is scheduled for December 1st. As federal marshals led Vanderberg away in shackles, she looked directly at me with pure hatred. I stared back calmly, thinking about my great-grandfather's bridge and the community that had rallied to defend it. Outside the courthouse, media crews surrounded me for statements. I kept it simple. Justice was served today. Now we rebuild. 6 months later, Pine Lake looked like paradise regained. The federal environmental cleanup had restored our water to pristine condition, while the community center rising from Vanderberg's demolished resort had become a symbol of what ordinary people can accomplish when they work together. I stood on the newly completed Ezekiel Blackwood Memorial Bridge, watching my daughter Melody teach traditional stonework techniques to a group of high school students participating in our summer heritage preservation program. The new bridge combined my great-grandfather's original design with modern engineering that would last another century. Vanderberg had received 8 years in federal prison with a requirement to pay $2.4 million in restitution for environmental damage and historic property destruction. Her assets had been liquidated to fund lake restoration and community improvements that benefited everyone she'd tried to intimidate. The Pine Lake Heritage Foundation, established with donated funds from supporters worldwide, had grown into something beautiful. Our annual Bridge Days festival now attracted over 10,000 visitors who come to learn about traditional crafts, environmental conservation, and the power of community organizing against corruption. Dr. Washington had parlayed our victory into a statewide campaign for HOA reform legislation. 3 new laws now protect homeowners from the kind of harassment Vanderberg had weaponized, while requiring transparency in HOA finances that would have exposed her embezzlement immediately. Mrs. Juliet, our retired county clerk turned community hero, had become the unofficial historian of our fight against HOA tyranny. Her detailed documentation of Vanderberg's crimes was being used by prosecutors in 12 other states investigating similar corruption cases. Rebecca Santos had been promoted to head the state's environmental crimes unit, specializing in cases where developers think they can ignore federal law. She credited our case with teaching her that environmental justice often starts with one person refusing to back down. The community center itself had become a model for sustainable development, built entirely with renewable energy, constructed by local craftsmen using traditional techniques. It housed environmental education programs that served 5,000 students annually. The irony was perfect. Vanderberg's failed resort had been replaced by something that actually served our community instead of exploiting it. But the most satisfying change was personal. Melody had won early admission to environmental law school, inspired by our battle to show that ordinary citizens can defeat powerful corruption when they work together. She planned to specialize in protecting rural communities from predatory development. "Dad," she said, joining me on the bridge as sunset painted Pine Lake gold, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just taken Vanderberg's money and sold the land?" I looked across the lake toward the community center, where tonight's environmental education class was visible through the windows. Kids from 3 counties learning about water conservation and traditional crafts. The smell of pine trees warming in evening sun mixed with the distant aroma of someone's barbecue dinner. Sweetheart, some things aren't for sale. Your great-great-grandfather built this bridge to connect our family to something permanent in an uncertain world. Vanderburg thought she could erase that connection. But she just made it stronger, Melody finished, understanding the lesson I'd tried to teach her through this whole ordeal. The bridge beneath our feet was stronger than the original, built with donated materials by volunteers who understood that community is something you build together, not something you buy with threats and intimidation. Federal historic landmark designation ensured it would be protected forever. As loons called across the clean water where poisonous resort runoff used to contaminate our lake, I realized that Vanderburg had given us an unexpected gift. Her attacks had forced our community to organize, fight back, and build something better than what existed before. The Pine Lake Community Center offered programs in traditional crafts, environmental science, and civic engagement, teaching the next generation that democracy requires active participation from ordinary citizens willing to stand up to bullies. 3 years later, our story continues inspiring communities across America facing similar battles against corrupt HOAs and predatory developers. The documentary about our fight had won a regional Emmy, while the Bridge Reconstruction GoFundMe had funded similar preservation projects in 47 states.
And that's how a 90-year-old stone bridge brought down a $4 million empire in exactly 48 hours. 48 hours. That's all it took for Priscilla Vanderburg to go from a HOA dictator to a federal prisoner. That Black could never once raise his voice while Vanderburg was screaming at inspectors and trying to bribe federal agents. That were quietly collecting documents with his teenage daughter and a retired county clerk. When she demolished that bridge at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, thinking she was eliminating a problem, she actually committed multiple federal crimes while handing her victim perfect evidence for prosecutions. Real power versus fake power in actions. The beautiful irony, Vanderburg Resort Site became a community center, and that bridge got rebuilt with federal historic preservation funds. Here's my question. What will you have done? Taken Vanderburg $400,000 right out and avoid the mess? Or fight for that bridge like your family honor depend on it? Someone in your neighborhood is probably dealing with their own Vanderburg right now. Ridiculous fines, selective enforcement, board members running their own legal dictatorship. Drop a comment about the most power-hungry HOA president you have encouraged. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who refuse to back down. Remember, bullies count on you. Stay quiet. Don't give them that satisfaction.